Awesome. That was a real fireside chat. A lot of fire in that. Thanks, Naya and Miloni, for that. For those of you who know me, I love numbers and I love asking a lot of questions. I used to be asked a lot of questions because I mostly was a backbencher, and since then I made a rule to ask a lot of questions. If at all I get an opportunity to be on stage. For all those sitting in the back, there are going to be a lot of questions. I don't know who said this, but this has somehow stayed with me for a long time since I heard it. In God we trust, for everything else we need data. I'm going to deep dive into what we call state of app marketing, take a deep dive into the numbers around installs, retention, so on and so forth. But for us to present any number, it's important to understand like what's the methodology we used, the sanity of the data, the relevance of the data to the numbers that we're going to present. So this is a very brief sample set that I'm presenting of what was considered to do this analysis that we're going to do for over the course of next 10, 12 minutes. So we looked into apps that had at least 3,000 plus installs, a total of 4 billion app installs for the year, and about 8.8 billion in-app events and about 3 billion sessions. So this was the sample size we collected to do the analysis, what we call state of app marketing in India. So what does it hold for us? As I said in my welcome note, there are various third-party research companies that peg our market share at a certain percentage. And given that if 8 or 8.5, 9 companies out of 10 work with AppsFlyer, so just wanted to take a dipstick into, how does it look when we kind of look India as a market. So if you look in this slide, this is like 2019. A majority of apps that were getting downloaded and installed in India were from China. Actually, 2018, it was much higher. If I recall it correctly, it was about 42, 43%, which came down to about 39% for China, which means the foreign apps were ruling the land, right? So what we call in our digital parlance, ROB, region of burn. So a lot of Chinese apps used to get installed here. People used to install these apps. But fast forward 2022, we have seen a massive shift because of whatever the geopolitical climate. Most of the Chinese apps got banned. But what is striking for me is, of course, India took a larger share, which is about 57, 56%. But there were some of the new entrants like Vietnam, Israel, Russian Federation. A lot of these companies started looking India as a market for their user acquisition. This is top 200 apps operating in India. Now let's dipstick into the regional nuances within India. So if you look at it, and this relates to the whole theme of Digital Bharat 2.0 as we were speaking since morning. This is state-wise breakup, and we'll get into the city-wise breakup as well. Maharashtra is leading about 12.5%, upwards of 12.5%, and I can read the numbers, but a majority of share is from the states which are not in the top 7, top 8. But the interesting fact that I want to present is if we break down into the cities, I think about 17, 18% of the app installs that are happening in India, and I told you the data set is about 4.5 billion installs, right? About 15 to 17% is happening from metros or top 4 or 5 cities. And a majority of this is happening what we call the Bharat. Call them tier 3, tier 4, yeah, whatever the definition you want to put. So, and this is a growing trend we're seeing. And I think if we look at the macros, the socio-economic emergence in the country, on a 1.4 billion population, give and take about 700 odd million phones we have. And the headroom that we have is essentially from what we call rural India, emerging India, or the Bharat. That's where the headroom is. And that's where we're seeing most of the installs coming from. And not only installs, if you look at the revenue, to a larger extent, I think revenue drivers are also going into that side. So let's get into the install trends, as I said. By the way, NOI, you might see this terminology being used. It's non-organic installs. The best way to classify a non-organic install, for the lack of words, is when we use a certain influence, either paid or not paid. Not paid, I mean a certain influence which is not directly essentially paid by the app developer, but which you essentially track and measure using a measurement platform. this one is interesting. So if you look at it, at 3/4 2021 data versus 3/4 2022, we're seeing that the NOI share, there's a slight or a marginal decline. So what does this mean? That the overall number of installs across any vertical that you're seeing here, entertainment, food and drink, the NOI share of the total number of installs has dropped. So does that mean people are not doing user acquisition? Well, interestingly, if I look at the volume, the NOI volume has per se increased, right? So from a 3/4 2021 to 3/4 2022, there is a 22% increase in entertainment, 56% in finance. Across all verticals, you'll see an increase in non-organic installs. So there has been an increase in the non-organic installs, paid installs, measured installs, whatever you want to call it, while the share might have dropped, but the mass number has increased. And now I want you to focus, this is the same graph that you saw on the previous slide, just focus on the green histogram pillars here. This is H1 last year versus H1 this year. Even significant growth in terms of NOI volume. So more and more app developers are using tools to specifically identify the user, measure it, and hence you see the NOI share increasing. It means nothing if we cannot retain our users. We might get in 1 million installs and lose half of it, more than half of it in a certain period of time, and we don't have a high LTV that is desired, then it means nothing. So it's very important to see how does our app work and what's the retention. These are some of the retention rates we have seen. Q3 last year versus Q3 this year, pretty much flat retention, not much of a change in the retention rates on a year-to-year basis. On that note, let me, as I promised you, I'm going to ask a question. What does the day 30 uninstall rate look like? Anybody? Before I point out on someone. Any industry will work. Social, commerce, entertainment, overall. All right, I won't take so much time because I've been instructed that we are already short of time. So as high as 40% uninstall. This is people who installed your app and ended up uninstalling the app, right? A 40% uninstall overall, and this is the various sectorial wave, vertical wave of uninstalls across various verticals. Now the interesting thing is, while we see 40% of uninstall happening, what is the number of uninstalls, of these uninstalls that have happened, of this cohort, what is the percentage of uninstall that happened, let's say in week 1? Pardon me? Very good. Very, very close. 77% by day 7, about 88% by week 2. So a large portion of uninstalls, about 70 to 80% of the uninstalls that will happen in day 30, about 70 to 80% happen in week 1. The question that comes to the table is that how do we reduce this churn? What does it take to reduce the churn? Because there's no point in having a leaky bucket and keep filling that bucket, right? Not a great idea. Let's look at remarketing as a tool, right? Most of you would heard of remarketing, retargeting. So we did an analysis on the same sample set that I showed you earlier on. Apps that were running retargeting versus apps that are not running retargeting. And here is the day 7, day 14, day 3 retention target, right? So apps that were running retargeting had a retention, that were not, sorry, running retargeting had an 8.3% versus 9.4%, and so on and so forth on various days. I mean, we can get into the numbers, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is an inherent, like 20 basis points, 25 points increase in the retention on apps which run retargeted versus apps that don't run retargeting. As I said, in God we trust, for everything else we need data. Again, this is a sectorial wave across various verticals. We don't necessarily need to kind of cement too much time on this, but if anybody is interested, I can share more details around that. Okay, we have a greater retention, but what does it mean for me from a revenue standpoint? So if you look at the average revenue per user on apps that are running retargeting versus apps that are not running retargeting, even that is high. And this is a monthly breakup for this year. You can clearly see a difference. If you have apps or user segment where you run retargeting and you don't run retargeting, what is the inherent increase on that? So that's a share of paying users. Now retargeting is of two types essentially, if I were to kind of classify. One is you have your users who are dormant, not using. They used to interact, do a purchase, play the game, but then now they are dormant. So we re-engage with them, and there's a certain set of users who were your users at one point in time with whatever capacity, but they have uninstalled. So we do reinstallation or we do re-engagement. So if I were to draw the cut between the two, we see a far higher share of paying users increase when we rekindle our dormant users. Like we call them low-hanging fruits in the normal language. It's very, very easy to re-engage, rekindle, resurrect your existing users who's like dormant versus getting a new customer altogether. I'm not saying that we don't have to do the reinstallation. Very important, because 77% of uninstalls are happening, right, on day 7. So therefore, very important to do that. I'm just trying to give a sneak peek into if we have a re-engagement campaign versus reinstall campaign, how the data looks like. Now the question is like, how do we work on this reinstall, retargeting, re-engagement strategy? Now various companies, various verticals have their own way of looking at it, because one shirt fits all kind of a solution. It's not there. In commerce, we see a certain re-engagement strategy. In shopping, we see it's a certain strategy. In gaming, there's a different strategy that works. But by far, if you look at the numbers, about 50-70%, 50 to 60% happens within first 14 days, in 2 weeks. That's normally the trend, how people do re-engagement. This is an interesting slide, which by the way is not an AppsFlyer's slide. We did some analysis with one of our customers, and I would strongly urge you to look into data like this, because all of you have your own raw data that you can further analyze to understand how, for example, a re-engagement works. But before I get into this slide, constant nudging also cheeses off somebody, right? So in a user behavior, user acquisition strategy, you constantly nudge, it might have a negative impact. So what's the fine line? So this is the stat that's showing for this particular customer. If you look at the blue histogram, it just shows the number of engagements, and the green line shows you the conversion rate that one could get. For this particular customer, they figured out that in about 0 to 1 re-engagements, that's where in the first re-engagement they see the maximum conversion. And thereafter, it is steady, it is increasing, but at some point in time, it plateaus out or maybe can decline also. Don't get into the number here too much. Essentially, what I want you to understand is the trend, right? So there has to be a certain trend that your data will tell you. What is the amount of re-engagements we need to do to have that optimum balance that we get the user to engage, convert, pay, or whatever subscription without uninstalling. So that's the important piece of data. And so 3 key takeaways from this session. One, emergence of what we call the Digital Bharat, the tier 3, tier 4 cities where we have maximum headroom. The dispensable income is increasing, the cost of smartphone is coming down, the capacity of smartphone is increasing. People did not have the ways and means to. I was the other day talking to one of the founders of a fintech company. There was an aspiration, for example, to invest, but there wasn't a platform to invest. So fintech is showing a lot of strides. So too, same with e-commerce, fashion, or anything else, or gaming. So I am personally very bullish. The data says, so digital ecosystem eruption is going to happen in tier 3, 4, 5 cities. Do not ignore them. Bharat 2.0, as we call it, should be the next frontier. Vernacular language nuances definitely can play a part. Secondly, what we cannot measure is what we cannot control, right? I don't remember the name of the gentleman who said it, I think 50 years back. I know 50% of my marketing budget is waste, but I don't know which 50%. Very, very important to use measurement as a tool to identify where your users coming from, how you can optimize, and use those techniques going forward. So paid channel, as some would call it, but it's not necessarily the NOI is from paid channels, like running your campaigns on Google's of world and Facebook's of world. There are multiple channels you run, your social media, your CRM channels, stuff like where you don't necessarily spend money, but are you measuring them? So put your measurement into place so that you identify where these users are coming from. And third, cannot invest in leaky buckets. Doesn't make sense to have a huge amount of churn, a huge amount of uninstall. If we can't retain the customer, then it's not a great strategy and a great place to have. Pretty much from my side. Any questions? Happy to answer, or else we can take later.
Hi, I had one question. So I saw that for shopping sector, like the slide, that remarketing did not lead increase in retention. I was curious, why is that?
Awesome. Great observation. That was the only vertical that did not show a growth, and you
I was asking because I belong from shopping.
Yeah. I can give my hypothesis around it. Like I can't do a crystal ball gazing as to why it does not work. But after speaking with most of the shopping companies that we work with, if you look at shopping, there is already the engagement levels. What they do is right from the beginning, they start to engage the users. There is a very high level of organic installs that happens in the shopping vertical. So combine these two, I think if you do, which means the intent is higher. So not necessarily, as per my understanding, a higher amount of retargeting necessarily leads to a higher conversion, because the conversion or the engagement is already high there.
Thank you.
Let me introduce myself, Rajita Nair, and Business Analytical Solutions. I am heading it. I'm the CEO and co-founder of it. And my two questions are, one is that what drives you in your personal life, the message that you would like to give this audience today in this forum, a message to everyone that will help them to grow. It's a very simple question, I think.
I know how to answer it. Sounds philosophical, but mostly what I keep saying, the team that I work with, is to be vulnerable and not presume to know things. If you don't know, just stand out, stick your neck out, say, I don't know. I think there are more people, the data, by the way, says that people fail not because the help is not available, but the lack of asking help. I think there are more people willing to help than people asking for help. Seeking, always seeking. Sounds very philosophical, but that's what I have. Thank you.
Myself, Prem. I'm marketing manager at ICT, Mumbai. So I have a question here. You mentioned, uninstall of app. Okay. So you mentioned, a lot of app uninstalls. Right. 75% drop, 88% drop in first week and second week. So I wanted to know, to overcome this problem, we come up with app pushes and web pushes. So kind of retargeting the audience through our database. But after putting a lot of efforts, by offering campaigns and all, the ratio maintains the same. So may I know what are the factors which might hampering this uninstalls or triggering this to the audience to uninstall the app? Is it the product or again and again retargeting?
One, as the data showed, more retargeting is eventually going to nag the customer off and you will lose it, or the inherent value or the is not going to be there, right? So any delta is not, you won't see that. But if I were to look at it a little differently, like in a more pragmatic manner, see, they say you look into the laptop, you see a lot of Excel, a lot of data. Close the laptop and you see the world, right? Sometimes I think we are getting a little too much into data and losing that emotional fabric of understanding the things. No matter what science you apply, but if your product, as Mr. Sani said, is not going to solve for the customer pain points, it's not going to fly. So one, is there a need? Two, overall user experience, right? You walk into a certain mall, a certain store, or a certain coffee shop because of that whole experience, right? There isn't heaven and hell difference between coffee A and coffee B. I'm not a coffee drinker, I wouldn't know it either ways. But wouldn't be, I'll presume there won't be a heaven and hell difference. But you'll still want to walk an extra mile, drive an extra mile to get into the next best blue tokoi or whatever it is.
Yes.
So I think, in my personal opinion, as a consumer, I see, one, is it solving for the demand, and how is the whole user experience? And if I were to kind of shift on the other side and look at it from a marketer standpoint, I would say that I'm seeing more and more, data-driven approach, which is fantastic, but we don't need to have a data-driven approach by keeping our emotional quotient on the shelves. That's my take. So I won't have a perfect technical answer on this, but this is, as I said, as a consumer experience and a marketer experience.
Addition to this, when we talk about market of Europe and market of UAE, so we are also active in these two parts also. So here the audience is I can say well educated, or so much into the product. There the ratio is very low. The installation is very low. But comparison to Indian market, it's very the numbers are undisclosable. But what do you feel? We need to educate more the Indian audience.
Oh, you mean the performance is better in that market?
Yeah.
And you said commerce, shopping?
So it's all about lubricant products.
Which products?
Lubricants, chemical, you can say. It's a chemical industry, or you can say biopharma.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to kind of understand the spending capacity outside is far more than what we have, and we are getting when did you hear 5 years back, I'm saying 6 years back, people playing games, spending money on games, buying subscription, buying coins. Even if I would do, I will feel ashamed and going to my friends saying, yeah, मैंने इतने रुपए देके coins करे, पागल है क्या, मेरे पास ये जुगाड़ है करने का types, Yeah. So that culturally we were not aligned to spend money there. I mean, gaming is a big business outside, and people spending dollars. People are making whatever in the metaverse, whatever is happening. So I think maybe that's the context. I don't have the full context to your business, but yes, I think the buying power, purchasing parity, whatever all those things that you look into. There are people who buy Porsches online. I don't think in India anybody would do that. So maybe one of those factors. I wouldn't know exact nuances of your business.
Thanks.
Thank you.